Welcome back to Talking Dragon Age, the show where I talk about Dragon Age. This episode is all about the Magisters Sidereal. At least, that's how Google said to pronounce it. So, here we go. The Magisters Sidereal are the 7 Magisters who broke into the Golden City and unleashed the Blight. Now, the Chant of Light summarizes what happened in the Canticle of Threnodies, but it goes into far more detail in the Canticle of Silence, which is dissonant. Dissonant basically means that the Chantry removed it from the official Chant of Light for some political reason. Well, based on what Corypheus says, the Chant of Light isn't completely accurate when it comes to what happened in the city, but it's still a good source of information because it's got the main idea right. To summarize, the Canticle of Silence explains that the 7 old gods spoke to the 7 Magisters through dreams, promising them vast power if they broke into the Golden City. It's important to note that they did this all in secret, because even the Imperium at the time knew this was a bad idea. When it came to the ritual, they brought an enormous amount of lyrium and a horde of slaves to sacrifice. Well, upon seeing the slaves, one of the acolytes decided, no, this is wrong. The chant doesn't say if he had a conscience or if he just saw this as a waste of perfectly good slaves. I hope it's the former, but we can't really know for sure. Anyway, when it became clear to the acolyte that he couldn't talk the 7 out of it, he ran straight to the Archon. Upon hearing what the 7 were up to, the Archon immediately marched his forces to stop them, but they were too late. The 7 had already used the slaves and lyrium to create a rift in the veil, which they used to travel through to the Golden City. Once there, everything they touched became tainted with their sin. When they approached the throne of the Maker, he lifted them up, cursed them for their malevolence, and banished them back beyond the veil, carrying the Blight. The Archon and his forces then found them, corrupted by the Blight, and, well, that's pretty much where it ends. It leaves a lot of things out, though, and I'll come back to that. For now, let's look at Corypheus' version. He is adamant that the city was already corrupted when he got there, and the Maker wasn't there at all. Let's assume this is true. Then, how did they get out? It couldn't have been the same way they came in, could it? Let's see, they get there, they find the Blight, they start walking through, they're twisted into their new forms, and then... what? Did they run back through the rift they came from? It obviously closed again at some point, but how? When? Regardless, I'm inclined to believe that upon their escape from the city, they were separated. The chant says the Archon called upon spirits to separate them all across the world, although Corypheus asks in his memories, did the others never escape from the city? If they were together when they got back to the world, he should know that, at the least, they did escape. Although it does appear that he has lost some of his memory, because there was a pretty big time gap of about 90 years between the Darkspawn rising and the Grey Wardens formation. The Grey Wardens are the ones that discovered and imprisoned Corypheus. So what was he doing in between that time? Whatever it is, he doesn't remember, because when he wakes up in Legacy, he's thinking like he just got back out of the city. While his memory loss could be attributed to his 1,000-year slumber, I don't think that's all of it, because his memory loss seems to be a theme here. Let's take a look at this codex entry called A Different Darkspawn. It speaks of a dwarf who claimed to have encountered a Darkspawn even taller than humans that politely spoke to him and then gave him food and other comforts. It also speaks of another dwarf who encountered 3 similar Darkspawn that were arguing, each blaming the others for something that went wrong in a city gone black, though they appeared to have trouble remembering what it was they were arguing about. One of them left, and then another killed the last, and then ate him. For good measure, maybe? Anyway, the entry says that what's written is about 20 years old. Way more recent than I would have expected based on the terminology, but because the writer explains that it was his great-great-grandfather that saw those 3 Darkspawn arguing, that puts that event at least 1 century before it was written. Because it's clearly explained that this encounter was relatively recent, it seems likely that the 3 in question had been separated for centuries before this. Because if they were together when they got back to the world, why would they have waited at least 800 years to have this argument? But that brings up the question, what have they been doing this whole time? Well, the codex entry states that the 3 found fighting seem to have lost a portion of their memories, just like the Architect. The Architect claims he doesn't know how he came to be, so I don't think he was involved in this encounter. If he was there, he would probably know of his origin. So that accounts for 5 of them in recent ages. Corypheus was imprisoned, the Architect has been trying to save the Darkspawn, and 3 others appear to have just found each other after being separated for centuries. Actually, in that entry, the writer says it was a friend of his that met the polite Darkspawn, However, it was not necessarily one of the same ones that his great-great-grandfather encountered. It could have been a completely new one. So that makes maybe 6 that we know about, all fairly recently, except for Corypheus, whom the Wardens encountered back around the first Blight. But besides him and the Architect, we don't really know what the others have been doing for the past 1,000 years. At least 3 were wandering the deep roads for a while, but for what reason? I'm not sure I have an answer. If you guys can think of anything, let me know in the comments. So besides them, I have a theory. Shocking, right? Well, let's look back to when the Magisters escaped from the city. The Blight would have begun to spread from everything they touched, sure, but the first Blight only really began when Dumat awoke from his ancient underground prison. And that was not immediate. There was a time gap between the Magisters' return and Dumat's awakening. The Chant of Light says they vowed to seek vengeance upon the old gods, as they felt betrayed by them. But the Codex entry for the first Blight says it's possible that they sought them out of some lingering devotion. But either way, I'm not sure how they would have found them. As shown, they are not affected by the calling. Which is weird, because in the Chant of Light, the Maker told them that the old gods would call to them from their ancient prisons. But the chant also says that once they got back to the world, they could no longer hear the call of the old gods. But there's still another lingering question here. The Blight began to spread from the Magisters. But how did that lead to the creation of other Darkspawn, like Herlocks and Genlocks? They only exist because of broodmothers, which are created by Darkspawn from their respective races. The Blight alone would have killed most that became infected, and left any survivors to become ghouls. I have a hard time believing that ghouls alone would have been able to create broodmothers, or even dig out the old gods. Even if it was one of the Magisters that awoke Dumat, broodmothers would still have been needed to create the Darkspawn horde. No, I think one of the Magisters deliberately created the first broodmother. Then its horde of children went out and made more, all the while they were digging to free the old gods that would have been calling to them. Why or how one of these Magisters would have done this, I'm not sure, but I can't think of a more plausible explanation for broodmother's existence. So, I think that about does it for this episode, guys. I will be making an episode for the old gods soon, and hopefully one for the Darkspawn themselves, so stay tuned for them. Once again, I want to mention, if you like my videos, then I highly recommend checking out Flamewing80 and Gilder Thalin. They have a lot of really cool ideas and theories over on their channels, and I definitely think you'll like what they have to offer. So that's it for now, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, Tala Nadas.